A very good afternoon and thank you so much for joining, guys. The webinar is about to begin in a few minutes. Before we get started, we'll do a quick audio video check to ensure that my audio comes through loud and clear and you're able to see my screen. A quick audio video check before we get started. Fantastic. Thank you, Steve and Mark, for confirming the audio and video. We'll get started with today's webinar in some time. We're going to have an interesting session today. The session is being recorded just in case. If you want a copy of the webinar, you can drop me a message. Today we've got Badri and Gokul and Fahim from my team. These guys have been extraordinarily helpful in putting together today's webinar. All right, once again, a very good morning and thank you so much for having taken the time to join the webinar today. Today's webinar is around a very important and a specific topic, probably at a point in time that's most important to the whole cybersecurity landscape. We're talking about password security. We're at that juncture in time with respect to the whole IT landscape. Things have changed or have taken a turn in unpredictable ways. With the whole pandemic, we've seen accelerated cloud adoption. We've seen digital transformation that's been powered by hybrid workforce and whatnot. With the whole deal of this transformation and moving to the cloud and adopting new identities for people, we understand that password security is at the center of this whole security discussion that we are trying to have. As we speak, there's one obvious change that has happened. There are new identities that keep getting provisioned for your users every day, day in, day out. New applications that your users need. These could be your legacy enterprise applications that are now cloud facing or internet facing. Your users should be able to access that, so you give them access to these applications via VPN, and at every given point in time you try to create new identities, and with every new identity we have the problem of security and securing them. So that is the reason behind why we put together the webinar. Right before the webinar, we took some time to kind of understand what IT administrators around the world think will be the biggest challenge of 2021, and turns out major chunk of them told identity security is the problem. So when we sat down, we thought, how can we get to a point where we are better than before or better off with respect to identity security, and the first and obvious touch point here being password security. So throughout the course of the webinar, I'm going to be giving you actionable insights. This webinar is especially dedicated to existing managed engine customers who are using ADSelfService Plus to help you configure your product better, or if you're a managed engine customer using any of our other offerings, you would probably want to pay attention to the use cases that ADSelfService Plus will be helping you solve. That is the agenda behind the session. Let me quickly jump into the session. Once again, a quick reminder, if you have questions coming up, please feel free. You can shoot your questions then and there. There's a chat window to the right of your screen. You can drop your questions. We've got experts who are going to take your questions. I would probably pick a question or two and try to answer it live. We'll see how that goes. So when it comes to the agenda, it's very straightforward. We'll see what should you be looking at while you're evaluating a password security solution or a self-service password management solution for your users and your organization. If you're already using ADSelfService Plus, it's going to be very obvious. We are going to be walking you through use cases, recent functionalities that we've built into the product. Most of it is actually powered by the whole remote working shift. We've tried to make our solution agnostic to the whole landscape right here, be it hybrid workforce or your remote workforce or people back to work. We will be able to help you with a password self-service solution. That is the idea. We'll talk about how ADSelfService Plus ensures granularity to the whole password security. Can it be done better than the native ways of doing it? We'll be discussing about that. We'll get in depth and break down functionalities like adaptive authentication, passwordless authentication, MFA for that matter, and what drivers essentially contribute to the future of ADSelfService Plus and this whole password self-service. We'll also get to the bit where we'll talk about how can you secure your endpoints, your users, applications that they use day in day out. Can we have some sort of logic with respect to implementing conditions for what they can access and what they cannot? So that's the agenda behind the session. It's probably going to be a 45-minute long session. The intention is to help you understand how ADSelfService Plus, our password self-service and password security solution, can essentially help you secure your identities. We'll get started with a little introduction of what's the state of password security today. Now, with the whole pandemic powered transition that we are talking about, many identities, innumerable to be precise, are on the cloud, and there's this one shift with the whole point of view that you should take in terms of looking at identity security, or for that matter even cyber security. We've seen a great deal of increase in the number of ransomwares that have gone out last year, companies who've been compromised because of a ransomware attack, and in most cases it is because of a credential compromise or a stolen identity. IT leaders around the world understand this is a cyber security pandemic, if I were to put it like that. It is a real problem because we still have legacy systems, or even for that matter most systems, that don't really focus on password security hardening. In fact, a quick Google search would help you understand that users are the weakest security link in your organization. Your security is only as strong as your users, and when you talk about security right there, we still have users using passwords like 1 2 3 4 5, or a keyboard waltz like QWERTY, QWERTY. And ironically, there are people who use COVID-19 as their password and whatnot. These are very predictable, straightforward passwords. But would you blame your users for doing this? As a matter of fact, it's probably a shared responsibility, in my opinion. We've been trying our best to educate our users and empower them, but in the process, there are a few checkboxes that we need to definitely ensure that we check. One of them is ensuring the whole password security is foolproof. With the legacy systems, there's a big problem of not ensuring password security in terms of the length, in terms of its complexity, in terms of its entropy. The problems are endless. So we will need a absolute overhauling right here. That's the need of the hour. We'll need to be able to look at solutions that can just go beyond the basic and try and empower us to have one-stop shop, one platform where I can manage user identities and their security. Simple as that. So while ADSelfService Plus is managed engine's offering to it, but while you're at it and evaluating password solutions, do look for these functionalities. Obviously, the first one is comprehensive password management. Can you have a single dashboard where all of your users' identities are mapped? You're able to manage the passwords, set policies in terms of how secure should they be, and enforce them as well, and enable your users to self-serve themselves. Because again, a big challenge that the pandemic really reiterated is the whole password security, and what happens when people try to reset their password. They end up calling the administrator almost all the time. You want to help reduce your help desk tickets from that front. You want to ensure that the right users get the right service at the right time. I'm terribly sorry about the glitch with the slide. It's probably with the transition. So you'd want to ensure that the right people get the right access at the right time. So that again is critical while you're trying to enable them. So comprehensive password management done from a single window is what you're probably looking for. And from an authentication standpoint, it doesn't make sense to just go with passwords any longer. It is obvious to all of us that just password security alone won't do the job. We must be looking at solutions that can sit on top of password security, make it foolproof. We are talking about multi-factor authentication. Almost all of you who are attending the webinar today, at some form you must have implemented multi-factor authentication, I'm sure. If not, this is a great time to start. And with how the landscape is proceeding, the whole password security tools out there are prioritizing MFA and building options to choose from. It's flexible. You want your users to use MFA and not skip it, so make it as easy for them as possible. It could be something as simple as an OTP that gets generated from their authenticated application, or their Face ID, or their Touch ID, something they possess, a knowledge factor. Such second factors of authentication are critical. We'll talk a little bit about that. And in terms of empowering your users, like I said, with the whole rush to go online, on cloud, new identities, so more hassle for the users in terms of remembering their passwords, and password fatigue or remembering new passwords is one of the reasons why they end up setting weak passwords or easy to remember passwords. You can't really help them right there. So what do? You set self-service up for them. They don't call you up first place, and they're able to understand what is required out of them when they set a password. You give them clear-cut instructions as to what are your requirements, what complexity checklist should they meet, and reset their password. So you give them a clean, straightforward, easy to use dashboard. And if you can make it hassle-free, if they can do it on the go, if they can do it while they are working from home and still be able to achieve the same result, then that's exactly where people start adopting the technology that you are trying to deliver for them. So here, end of the day, what we are trying to do with password security is to empower users so that they don't push that wrong button, so that they don't set weak passwords, so that they don't end up compromising your organization's security unintentionally. That is the idea. So Managed Engine ADSelfService Plus obviously is the solution that I have for you. One of the things that we'll note right here through the session is we've tried to keep it 360 degree. It's not just about password security. Now, a consecutive problem right here is to also enable them to be able to effortlessly access, because from whatever we understand, the challenge almost all the time is about logging in, right? They forget their password on the logon screen. They even think about logging in while they're on the logon screen. And while these new applications, maybe internal applications or these cloud applications that you've provisioned for them, are hosted online, that gives the attacker a very clear pathway or a route to probably socially engineer users in making them believe into the platform from where they are logging in, or the web page from where they are logging in is legitimate. That's the problem right here. So you want to minimize the number of times your users are logging in, number one. You want to minimize the number of touch points from where they are logging in. So that again is something that you can consider. So self-service along with single sign-on topped with multi-factor authentication is the solution that you should be going for. I'll quickly sum up or give you a brief overview of what ADSelfService Plus can do for an organization. So in terms of self-service, it can help your users reset their passwords on the go. It gives them clear provision to how to do it. And if their accounts are locked out, which happens in a lot of cases, again, that can be sorted as well. The users can unlock their own accounts. They don't need to call up the administrator. There's real-time password synchronization. So this is a wonderful, nifty functionality. If your users change a password in one platform, let's say on Active Directory for that matter, and you've got synchronization enabled, it's going to help those connected applications also have the new password. So that way they cannot or do not go through the whole process of redoing it or doing it over and over. Redundancy is avoided right there. Expiry notification again is a very nifty functionality. In fact, for all of you who are joining today, if you do not have ADSelfService Plus already, this component of ADSelfService Plus is free for use. Just drop me a message on the chat right now. We'll send you the link to the password expiry notifier tool. It's a nifty functionality. In a little while, I'll explain in detail how can it help. Expiry notification, that's something that you have to have in mind. And obviously MFA across endpoints, across touch points is what you need. MFA for logon, MFA when users are using their endpoints, MFA while they're accessing their VPN and whatnot. We'll talk about that in a while. And when it comes to SSO, what support are we looking at? What applications can be tied into the platform? And end of the day, self-service. Again, when in terms of users moving between job locations or going and working from their home or working remotely, you never know what updates are required. Users can self-update in terms of what group accesses they need, in terms of their job destinations or locations from where they are working, maybe update their telephone number and basic Active Directory attributes that you don't need to update, or the users can absolutely do it themselves. They don't need to call you up to do it. Give them that provision. So a couple of high level points right here. We'll get into the granularity in a while. Now, why are we going forward with this whole password security journey? The idea is we want to ensure that there is minimal reason for us to worry. Number one, we don't want to be a victim of a ransomware or a compromised lateral movement or a brute force attack or whatnot. So we'll start with something very, very fundamental. We'll see and understand how can you harden it, because it all starts with the compromise of a single account. In most cases, we know it need not be someone with privileges or credential. If we were talking about legacy systems, or probably even for that matter something like Active Directory, which encapsulates about 90% of the world's IAM, that being the case, if a single attack or single account is compromised, within a span of 48 hours an attacker will get to the administrator account if you do not have the necessary security checks. That is how easy it is. They can laterally move, they can find entries, put themselves, escalate their privileges, put themselves in groups and get hold of a privileged account. Not necessarily admin, even a privileged account would do for that matter, because as is, a basic LDAP query is going to give away a lot of PII. It's going to let them know who is the user, what access do they have, what can they do with that. So you have to understand that we cannot take that chance or risk. But what must supposedly be the security check, or for that matter policies that ensure your passwords are strong, aren't foolproof? That's the problem right here. If you talk about legacy systems, your users can still set passwords that I showed you on screen 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, QWERTY, password as the password, user as the password, whatnot, because the system does not stop them from doing that. So in terms of application as well, it isn't granular. We talk about group policy, but then is it granular? In most cases, it's one size fits it all approach. You do not stop your users from using dictionary words. That's a big problem. They use predictable passwords. Users are predictable, and a tool like Hydra, one of those password crackers, is going to effortlessly crack through your user's password if old policies or legacy policies are still in place. And in terms of length, that's something that you can apply with the legacy policies, but with respect to complexity, you stop them from using previously used passwords or iterations to previously used passwords. Those are certain concerns that you should try and answer. So what we'll try to do is figure out what can essentially harden security and make it foolproof. One easy way to go about doing it is to stop users from using dictionary words. That's a great place to start. You prevent them from using predictable passwords. You force them to use something that's not a dictionary word, so they end up choosing a pattern or try to do something that isn't obvious. And in terms of the length, in terms of the complexity, you would want to have special characters in place. You'd want to have the password length beyond what's the basic. We're talking about passphrases. Can we ensure that repetitive characters are not a part of the password? Can we also ensure that past passwords, or ones that were already compromised, are not a part of the password policy? So such exceptions need to be made, and ADSelfService Plus can help you enforce. I'll probably even show you the screen right here. So the enforcer right here helps users to exclude certain characters from their password. If you do not want your users to be setting a password that has their username or the name of the organization or specific characters or specific patterns, you can absolutely stop them from doing that. You can import a standard dictionary and stop your users from using any of these weak passwords. Magically, the slides are switching to the next. I'm sorry about that. So we're talking about password security and how can you enforce a strong password. And in terms of complexity, I was talking about dictionary words not being used, password length again being a problem, enabling them to use passphrases that are longer and have a stronger entropy. What else? Can you stop them from using palindromes? Yes. Can you stop them from using specific regex patterns? Yes. Whatnot. So you can configure the tool to have uppercase, lowercase, a special character, a number, a symbol, the length, All of that can be configured on top of what is already existing. So you can restrict characters, you can restrict the repetition of patterns, you can restrict the length, and while you're at it, you also want your users to be notified as to what's the checklist right here, that you can ensure that you can let them know on the screen where they're trying to reset. So password policy enforcer sits on top of the existing policy, prevents dictionary attacks, prevents brute force attacks, prevents password prediction in terms of commonly used words or patterns. That is again a thing that you need to be notified of. Again, when you go about doing this whole password security effort, one word that keeps coming up, or one technology that keeps coming up, or a thought process for that matter that keeps coming up, is zero trust. Now the whole journey right here is aligned towards getting us up to speed to zero trust. Implicitly, for a long time, we've trusted users within the organization, and we want to stop doing that right away. We want to ensure that they get the secure access that they need, but also at the same time have leverage and control over what can they access, how do they access, when can they access, and inspect the whole traffic that comes in and goes out. If they're trying to even reset their password, you should be notified that someone's trying to do that. If there is an anomalous behavior right there, you should be notified. So these are certain things that you can have in mind. And while you are taking this journey, you would want to ensure identity security, because every single time when someone requests for an access, their identity has to be validated. So there comes the zero trust framework. It is something that is adaptive. It is something that is conditional. It takes into account who your user is, the context from where they are accessing, and then makes the decision as to whether to let them go forward with the access or otherwise. If the risk factors or the risk scores or the risk scales are off the chart, aren't usual, then you begin by notifying, monitoring, and detecting if there are any anomalies. Once you detect them, you have extra factors of authentication in place. You make it difficult for them to go forward, and that thereby you anticipate what's coming up and you prevent a potential attack. So you know who's accessing your system. You would be able to stop them from going any further if they don't meet the said criteria set by you. And MFA will play a great part in that journey that you're trying to undertake. We'll talk a little bit about what all can we do. Now, besides application level MFA, obviously what would be very helpful while your users are working remotely is the endpoint MFA. Every time when someone tries to log in to their desktop or laptop, or even from their mobile network, from their mobiles provided by the company, organization provided devices, you can have an endpoint MFA right there. Every time when they try to access your systems, they got to go through the second factor, and that can be enabled. And this can also be offline. That is the beauty of it. So even if your users are yet to be connected to your VPN or to your network, it can be done offline. So endpoint MFA is something that you need to take into consideration. Obviously, Windows logon, when they're connecting to your VPN, trying to take hold of one of your Windows machines, maybe a virtual machine that you've set for them, you can have a Windows logon authentication set. For remote and local logons for other operating systems like Mac and Linux, that is supported as well. In terms of Active Directory operations, if you want a second factor for administrators or users or technicians that are performing Active Directory applications, you can have an authentication right there. For VPN, obviously, before they get access to your corporate network through a VPN that you've already configured for them, do you want a second factor of authentication? Absolutely yes, and that can be enabled. And in terms of cloud applications, the list is endless. I've listed Microsoft 365 and Outlook Web Access. There are more applications that are supported. So MFA turns out to be one of those solutions that makes our job easy in terms of securing identities. There's probably very little chance that MFA can falter. We're talking about stronger means of authentication as we proceed into the future. We're looking at ways of making it more complex from an authentication standpoint and more simple from an user access standpoint. That is the direction towards where we are headed. I'll show you a few policies that are possible and options that are available for MFA. We talk about SMS verification. Not my favorite though. There's Google Authenticator and other authenticators that are available. Time-based OTPs, Microsoft Authenticator is absolutely free if you are in Microsoft organization. If you're using Active Directory or Azure, you must get your users to implement Microsoft Authenticator. It's a mobile application, straightforward, gets the job done. In fact, if you're on your M365 console right now, you can look for Secure Score Dashboard. And under the Secure Score Dashboard, one of the things that you'd notice is you would be able to get an extra boost of 50 points on your secure score, which is more of a representation of where is your organization's IT security. With the Microsoft infrastructure per se, you'd get 50 points boosted just by enabling Microsoft Authenticator or any of those second factors of authentication. Do try it out after the session. Look up for Secure Score Dashboard, Office 365, M365. If you're there, you'd be able to check that. And support for other vendors like Duo, Radius, and obviously my favorites, the ones that I use, Fingerprint and Face ID. Pretty straightforward, easy to set up for your users. There's almost zero to no onboarding right there. It's very straightforward. Users can use their existing phone or their the smart devices and authenticate themselves into your system. So MFA, the success relies on making it as flexible as possible for your users. They need the experience. They do this day in day out. You don't need to teach them that, because while they authenticate their accounts on Facebook, Instagram, Google, there are second factors that are being asked for, so they know how it works. Easy for you to implement as well. Look for solutions that offer you the granularity and at the same time the intensity with which it can secure. I'm talking about adaptive authentication right here. Critical actions. If someone's trying to self-serve, reset a password, maybe unlock an account, you don't want the attacker to be able to do that. Essentially, the lockout mechanism and the password security is there to prevent them from being able to crack the account. But if you let them reset it or unlock their accounts over and over again without any restriction, then they're going to eventually find out a pathway into your organization. So make it foolproof. Even if someone wants to reset or unlock a locked out account, they will need to go through a multi-factor authentication or a second factor of authentication. Similarly, for your machine logons, OWA logons, VPN logons, you can enable whatever factor, security questions, email verification, phone-based verification, whatever you think is ideal for your users, you can have it set. But please do give it a thought of setting it up. So a couple of examples right here. While your users are working remotely, ADSelfService Plus will still let your VPN talk to your systems back in hosted on-prem or in your organization, and it will authenticate once again. It will check against the list of criteria that you've set. If yes, that's the only time even when your users will be able to access the VPN gateway. So right here, even before they can have their first touch point of access, right at the VPN gateway server, they get authenticated, that gets verified, that gets relayed back, and then after validation, they'll be able to go forward and use their applications. That's the idea right here with which we put together the MFA. So all in all, look for solutions out there that support factors that are flexible for your users in terms of application and granularity. These are things that you need to have in mind while you're evaluating a solution for multi-factor authentication. Now the next obvious step is, as much as we try to secure it, it's also important that you make it foolproof. Give your users very little opportunities to make the mistake, and there comes single sign-on for that instance. When it comes to single sign-on, you will have to be able to get to speed right away. I'm talking about being able to integrate and help your users single sign-on into all your existing applications. Ones that are hosted on your intranet, ones that are hosted internet-facing, ones that are on the cloud. You would need your users to be able to connect to all these applications in one go, be able to know and grant access on what applications do they require, what they don't remotely. Now that would be a superpower that I'd want. I would need to know who's got what access, what applications can I enable single sign-on for, what level of granularity can I enable single sign-on for, and go forward. That's something that ADSelfService Plus does an effortless job of. Similarly, when it comes to synchronization of passwords, there are a few systems that you'd want to have their passwords synchronized with Active Directory. You can absolutely do that. Enable the synchronization. When your users change their passwords in one platform, it gets reflected across places. Saves a lot of trouble. Similarly, enabling SSO is very straightforward. You've got applications list, an endless, very long list. We keep adding supports to new application every month. So you have a very long and an exhaustive list. You think of an application, an enterprise application, or HRMS platform, or one of those collaboration platforms, you would already have a provision to SSO these applications for your users. And in terms of critical help desk tools or IT enablement tools, all of them are also available. I'm talking about platform tools like probably for that matter Zoho or Salesforce or Service Desk. You have all of that under one place. This is also supported for easy for your users. Now we've just crossed, probably in my opinion, one half of the whole password security landscape. As we speak, attackers are coming up with new ways to crack through password security. We'll need to also up our game, and probably the first step towards that, in my opinion, is adaptive access. Try to ensure every access request that comes into your organization is validated against a set benchmark, and if it's adaptive and if it dynamically alters the benchmark based on past user behavior, that's exactly where we are going for. So we are trying to check if every login access, if every access attempt for that matter, is continuously and contextually monitored. Biometric factors are taken into account. Geographical factors or demographic factor, location, network address, the device from which they are accessing, the time of the day they are accessing, what resource are they trying to access. All of this gets accumulated, a risk profile gets drawn for a user, and if they do not validate themselves or have a risk score that is much higher than what's the threshold, then you should ensure that these users are stopped, or at least have an extra layer of validation, maybe for those forgetful users. So you try to make analysis out of what their logging in behavior is, and then give them the access wherever that's needed. So you can configure custom policies. That's something that you need to know, because while you're doing risk-based access and contextual access, you don't want to put off your user by having excess validation criteria right there. So you can be granular for privileged users, for users with admin access. You can have the risk-based adaptive access cranked up to notch. So that's the idea. You try configuring these policies for your users, make it simple for them, at the same time have context behind every access attempt that they're making. Because one problem that I've listened to administrators talking about is the whole behavior of your users while they are working from home. Their behavior is a little unpredictable. It's very similar to that of an attacker, I would say, for that matter. Why? Because they access at times of the day that's most convenient for them. They access early in the morning, late in the night. They do that. They access and request access for systems probably that they never wanted access for before, in the name of being able to use applications, being able to go forward, just keeping the lights on. In most projects, people want access and try accumulating access. So escalations are a big problem right here. And while you do risk-based authentication, you'd know who these users are. You'd have some context to work with. You'd be able to draw parallels from their past behavior. And if they aren't accessing from, let's say, a specific geographic location. In my case, I've been working from home, and I access my office or corporate network from my home in India. And if there's a deviation in such behavior from a different IP, one that's blacklisted, maybe one that's not recognized before, one that's not in my system, from a device that's not already been mapped under my name, the administrator gets notified and the access becomes much more stringent, newer factors to go through. So you should try to empower your users. That's the ultimate aim. And at the same time, empower ourselves right here to make it difficult for an attacker to get into your security posture. That's the idea right here. So we'll look at a few more self-service options for our users, because we are in that journey. We'll try to see if we can get our users to reset their own passwords on Active Directory. We'll see how the system helps in configuring self-service policies for themselves, or gaining access for a group or a domain or a policy. How does that work, and where all does this come to apply? So from a password policy configuration standpoint, as an administrator, you'd be given the provision to get granular. You can say what who gets, what policies apply, what policies don't. And when it comes to self-service for your users, again, you will be able to do that from a secure portal. You will be able to help them access your systems, do a self-service right from the ADSelfService Plus application. It can be on-prem, it can be hosted on the cloud, it can be internet-facing. You can help them get self-service instantaneously. They don't end up calling you. So this is something that we want you to implement and check for your users. If they want to update any attribute on Active Directory, they can do. If they want to subscribe for a mail group or a group, they can very much do. So enable self-service for them. And if you want some level of control, if you want probably their manager to approve before they get access to a group or a mail group or one of those changes that they made to their Active Directory account, you can obviously set an approval workflow mechanism in place. So that comes pretty handy in double checking someone's request right there. So far, we've tried to see how can we help our users access your resources from probably from a single service, a sign-on standpoint, or from a self-subscription and a self-service standpoint. Now, another problem again that we need to address is forgetful users. When they are trying to do all of this, they eventually end up forgetting their passwords. They forget to probably even reset their passwords when it's about time. Can I remind them right on time? So this is the component that I was talking about a while ago. It's free for use. Drop me a message or drop one of our product experts on chat right now to avail this functionality. You can remind your users of their impending password resets. If their accounts are about to get locked out, you can tell them that, see, you'll have to reset your password. This is how long you have, and you can do it in multiple channels. You can notify them on a text message, on a push notification, send them out an email, configure any probable channel that suits best for your user, remind them in all these places, have scheduled reminders, ones that go out a month before the date of reset, ones that go probably 1 week before it, 1 day before it, 1 hour before it. You can remind your users to reset their password because their passwords are expiring. This is a great way to avoid account lockout calls. You be ahead of them, you notify them, you get the job done. So through and through, ADSelfService Plus helps you do a couple of things in terms of what you can do with the granularity. You can decide what level of access who should have. You can decide what applications can someone receive. You can notify your users, and probably if they're forgetful, and one another stakeholder to even remind them. Such granularity is what we're looking at in password self-service solutions. Now, ADSelfService Plus is a comprehensive, straightforward password self-service solution that again ties very well with the critical capabilities for any IAM solution. Now, when it comes to Gartner recommended capabilities, you should be able to help users go through their identity lifecycle, empower them while they are working remotely. Can you help them access their resources at the same time without compromising security? So adaptive authentication is something that you should be looking at. Authentication methods or the support that's available, enabling your users to be able to access it. And while you're doing it, do you also analyze user behavior and give them access only based on context? Is your solution high available? You want the business to go on. So high availability, straightforward and easy to deploy, access requests in terms of subscriptions that they want to groups, and approval workflows that can help them get that access after a validation on top of it. If there are audits that you want to perform as to who's made a change to their password, where has it been initiated from, if there's a malicious logon, the solution does enable you to do. So there are quite a lot of identity access management capabilities put out by Gartner as critical, being managed by ADSelfService and AD360. Now, as I already understand, a lot of you are existing Manage Engine users. A few of you use products like ADSelfService Plus, AD Manager, AD Audit Plus for that matter. Now, my recommendation to you would be to move to AD360. If you already have two products, you can bundle them together and have Active Directory related management or identity access management done from a single console. Help you manage your access enforce security policies, get out of the box compliance reports, make it easy for your users with a single dashboard. If you have a help desk or other stakeholders in your organization, you can have them onboarded to the platform too. So such is the flexibility of an IAM solution that you should be looking for. ADSelfService Plus is that SSPR and MFA and SSO component of a bigger solution, which is AD360. Do drop me a message or an email. I'll share my details with you. I would be able to understand where exactly and how exactly have you configured your solution, give you recommendations on what to do for 2022. And with respect to AD360, if you are looking to expand your identity and access management portfolio, you want to manage user life cycles, automate the whole process of user lifecycle management, manage identities and their access and their privileges across different platforms, be it public cloud or be it on-prem or the whole hybrid workforce. You want to manage their identities and empower them. In fact, monitor what access requests are they making, how are they interacting with critical resources in your organization. You can do all of that from a single platform in AD360. And while you go about doing it, what is at the core of AD360 or ADSelfService Plus matter is the zero trust philosophy. At every point in time, there is a continuous assessment of risks and threat. Policies have become adaptive. You can get granular and say who gets what access based on behavior. Through and through, while you're at it, again, compliance is the flip side. While you empower your users, while you give them instant access, you also want to ensure that your organization is compliant. PII, critical information, intellectual property, all of it is at stake, so you should have control over that. And if you have out-of-the-box reports for compliance pertaining to password security, that would be a great add-on. And privileged accounts are the accounts that have the keys to your kingdom, so being able to monitor their access, what policy strong are their passwords, and how difficult it is to crack through a privileged account are things that you should be considering while you're choosing an identity access management solution. ADSelfService Plus does the self-service and SSPR enablement job, and AD360 does the whole identity access management suite. I'm available for questions. Experts have already been taking your questions. Do drop your questions right now on the chat. We'd be more than happy to take your questions. A quick announcement that I want to make right here. We are running year-end offers on our solutions right now. As we speak, you'd be able to avail one of those solutions that I spoke today, ADSelfService or AD Manager or Audit or AD360 for that matter, at a hugely discounted price. Drop me a message. I'll loop you in with sales. I'll let them know that you are interested, you are a part of this exclusive webinar for customers, and get you that discount that you need. You all have a great rest of the day. The webinar was recorded. If you want a copy of the webinar, drop me a message or write to me an email. I'll send out details. If you are looking to implement any of the solutions that I spoke, do drop me an email again. I'll get on a call. We'll figure out what works best for you. If you need recommendations on how to go hybrid or remote, we've been doing that for almost 1 year now, and we've got case notes I'd love to share. Towards the end of the webinar, we'll also give you access to our buyer's guide. If you're evaluating ADSelfService Plus, if you've not yet bought it, you think ADSelfService Plus might be helpful, the cases that I discussed are the ones that you're looking for, to read the guide. It gives you details in greater granularity. It tells you if you're belonging to a specific industry. Let's say you're a part of the education industry, you're an administrator managing identities of students, faculty and whatnot, you'd have specific use cases. If you're in finance, you'd want to know what best practices to implement from ADSelfService Plus. You'd want to know. You can go through this. So the buyer's guide gives you clear-cut cases on how can the product be put to use. So do drop me a message. I will be more than glad to share the resources that I just walked you through. You all have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for taking the time. You can drop me an email at j@manageengine.com. I'm going to be taking your questions on the chat right now. You've been a lovely, lovely audience. Thank you so much, and you all have a great day.